Dan the Man continuing to show out for Milwaukee on this season of Top Chef. I'm guessing watching these highlights doesn't get old for you on some of the wins over the course of the season.
The wins always feel good, man. I mean, it's such a stressful environment, and to be able to like breathe out loud when you win something, it just feels real good.
If you're not familiar, Dan Jacobs is the chef and co-owner of Dan and Esther Ev here in Milwaukee. It's a big one here for the episode coming tonight. It's called Goodbye Wisconsin, the last one shot here in the state. Great to have you here, kind of chop it up a little bit as I joked earlier. I'm curious to start off with, a lot I want to get to you with, Dan. The competition element, cooking in this fashion versus what you've done your entire adult life as a chef in restaurant kitchens all across the Midwest. How different are those two attacks?
Vastly. I mean, it's like you have, like working in a restaurant, you have time, you have a team, you have, there's that sort of, you have like a whole thing going on. Whereas like competition cooking, man, you got to go with it. And it's weird because that clock is always your enemy. Like, it's not really like the other people. It's like I always looked at the clock as my enemy. It's always like you looked up like, oh, man. And you just knew that you had to get something to the plate at a time. But it's very, very different.
I'm not an anxious person, but watching the quickfire challenges, I was getting like nervous for all of you with how the time was ticking away there. You're doing something really cool at one of your spots, Esther Ev, where you're bringing some of the dishes that you've actually made on the show that we've seen you make for the competitions, bringing those one per week to the restaurant. Yeah. I'm curious, is there a favorite one that you've made so far that we've seen this season, or one with a great story, one they're proud of?
Yeah, you know what? I think the one I'm most proud of, and the one that I think has like the best story behind it, is the Indigenous Food Challenge, like the sunflower risotto dish. It's like a porridge. First off, Indigenous food doesn't get the highlight that it should. I think it's such a cool and it's a cuisine that a lot of people don't know a lot about. And I think the way of being able to use like a whole plant like a sunflower, from start to finish and put it together in a dish is really cool. So I think it's got a great story. Plus that challenge was really fun because I'm really good friends with Elena Terry, who is there. Was it Sean Sherman has become kind of friends since then, and then Bryce Stevenson, who's used to work with us at Dan and Fauntleroy, he was there judging, and so that was kind of cool. And he knew my dish right away without me, like just me putting it down. He didn't even know it was me coming next. He's like, oh, I know whose dish.
It's one of my favorite episodes because you could see all of you guys put on a level playing field. No one was totally comfortable with that one. Yeah. I know you've spoken a lot about this, but one of the big reasons you wanted to go on the show was because of your diagnosis, Kennedy's disease, which we featured years ago and you're still dealing with. Yeah. What have been the responses that you've gotten that have been most powerful, most impactful for you, whether it's online, whether it's someone in the restaurant responding to that?
It's been a lot. I mean, a lot of it's been online. I'd say like about every episode I get 2 or 3 DMs of people who have some sort of degenerative or neuromuscular disease or something that's, that they're dealing with that I've inspired them to continue to try to work through. That always makes me feel incredibly good. I was at Festa on Friday and a couple came up to me and they're actually spending their honeymoon here in Milwaukee because of Top Chef. Wow. And because he's dealing with, the gentleman was dealing with an autoimmune disease, and I've inspired him to, to try to push through as much as he can. And man, I almost cried. Like, it was beautiful. Like that's the stuff that gets me, I think, more than anything else.
That's amazing. I can speak to that to some degree. We have friends coming to visit from out of town this summer. They are nominally here to see us. They mostly want to eat at your restaurants and get to see you because they're big fans of Top Chef. I'd be curious, I know it's been a boon for Dan and for Esther Ev. Yeah. How will we know the lasting impact of this Wisconsin season on Milwaukee, on the restaurant scene throughout the state?
I think what the show has done and what it does for cities like Milwaukee is it really does kind of shine the light on that city. And I think you're seeing it, I mean, everybody, you watch the show and you see how beautiful Milwaukee is. And I think that's one of the things that and how well I've done on the show. Like, I think that's gonna build a bit. And there's always that saying where like, high tide raises all boats. Yeah. That's kind of what we're hoping for. And I've always wanted to see Milwaukee kind of shine the way it is right now, and it's cool to see.
Well, you were certainly shining as well. I know you wanted to be on the show for years, applied many times. It's neat to see you this season in Wisconsin. All you did for restaurants during the pandemic, kind of having this moment to shine and put us back on the map. Thank you so much for being here, and best of luck tonight. Another new episode of Top Chef airs tonight. We're hoping Dan continues to cook well because he's been rolling, as Brian Cramp knows very well. You've checked in with him a couple times.